A stuffy Roman night in June of 1456 smelled not only of the blooming gardens of the Vatican, but also of the stagnant water of the Tiber, the dampness of old stone, and, far more importantly, an all-consuming, sticky fear. On the steps of St. Peter's Basilica stood an old man with parchment skin and eyes that reflected an unblinking, ominous glow. His name was Alfonso de Borja, but the world knew him as Callixtus III. Above the domes of Rome, cutting through the inky sky, hung a celestial visitor, an object that modern astronomers would call Halley's Comet, but which to the people of that time looked like a flaming sword poised over the very soul of the Christian world. In this moment, as the comet's tail stretched across the heavens like a divine scourge, we see not merely superstition, but the peak of psychological tension of an entire era. The air that night was still. Only the chirping of cicadas in the Belvedere Gardens broke the silence, and somewhere in the distance, the rhythmic splash of oars from a solitary boat on the river could be heard. Before we delve into this fascinating investigation of how one of the most influential figures in history declared war on a celestial body, I invite you to join our community of explorers of the past. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with those who appreciate a deep analysis of history. Your support helps us unearth the most incredible facts hidden beneath layers of ancient myths and transform dry chronicle entries into a vibrant, pulsating narrative. To understand why the elderly pontiff decided to engage in a personal confrontation with an ice block flying through the vacuum of space, we need to grasp the context of a total existential crisis. Just 3 years prior, in 1453, an event occurred that contemporaries compared to the end of the world: the fall of Constantinople. The fall of the Second Rome was not merely a military loss, it was a psychological amputation. The Ottomans stood at the doorstep of Europe, and every sunrise could bring news of the beginning of the end. In Callixtus III's headquarters, located in the cramped, poorly ventilated rooms of the Apostolic Palace, the scent was not of incense, but of acrid ink, rancid lamp oil, and road dust. The Pope was obsessed with the idea of a crusade. Every morning he sifted through spy reports written on rough paper that pricked his fingers, and peered at maps where the borders of Christendom shrank like shagreen leather. And then, at this moment of maximum existential fragility, it appeared in the sky. Here we see the fatal error of many researchers who attribute the Pope's actions to primitive ignorance. I propose looking at the logistics and political psychology. The comet was not for Callixtus III an astronomical curiosity. It was an informational weapon of the enemy that needed to be intercepted. Few notice that at this time, Rome was home to the best minds of the era, such as Paolo dal Pozzo Toscanelli, who was already attempting to measure the trajectory of this object using simple brass goniometric instruments, cold to the touch in the pre-dawn hours. Historians often debate how deeply the Vatican understood the physical nature of celestial bodies, but I believe that for Callixtus III, physics was irrelevant. His personal ambitions were inextricably linked to his role as the last defender. As the first pope from the Borgia family, he bore the burden of needing to prove the legitimacy of his clan through a great triumph. His character is the archetype of the elder at the threshold, a man who feels his time is running out and who is willing to make any, even the most irrational, gesture to maintain order in a crumbling world. In his chambers, candles of expensive beeswax burned constantly, their sweet scent mixing with the pungent smell of vinegar liniments that doctors used to ease the pontiff's gout pains. There is a persistent legend, circulated since the Enlightenment era, that Callixtus III officially excommunicated a comet. This is a wonderful myth for those who wish to portray the Middle Ages in a ridiculous light, but the reality is far more nuanced and interesting. The pontiff issued a bull titled Cum His Temporibus. If we analyze the text of this document without bias, we will not find exorcism formulas against cosmic dust. Instead, we will see a brilliant, albeit frightening example of mass consciousness management. The Pope ordered bells to be rung in all churches across Europe at noon. Why? Here lies the psychological hook of contradictions. Officially, to call the faithful to prayer for deliverance from God's wrath, of which the comet was the personification. In fact, however, this was the first ever global warning system for a military threat. Imagine the sound of these bells. Noon, scorching air, the smell of sweat and fear in the narrow streets of European cities. This sound did not allow one to forget that somewhere out there, on the border, at the walls of Belgrade, the fate of civilization was being decided. The comet became a visual anchor, and the ringing of bells, an auditory one. Callixtus III used the celestial phenomenon as a giant billboard for his mobilization campaign. Here we encounter the first serious doubt about the official version of the foolish Pope. What if he didn't believe in the mystical power of the comet at all, but merely used it as the only way understandable to the people to explain the necessity of enormous war expenditures? In the Vatican treasury by then remained only heavy gold florins and silver pennies, which the Pope ordered to be counted day and night. The sound of coins falling onto the treasury's wooden tables was more important to him than the whisper of prayers. The personality of Callixtus III deserves a separate analysis. An 80-year-old man, tormented by ailments, he barely left his bed, upholstered in heavy burgundy velvet, which had worn and faded over the years of service. His mind, however, worked with the efficiency of a modern crisis manager. In his private chambers, decisions were made that contradicted the interests of Europe's greatest monarchs. His obsession with the crusade was so great that he ordered gold and silver artifacts from the papal treasury to be melted down to pay for the fleet. This is the behavior of a man for whom the material world had already lost its value in the face of eternity. Here, the archetype of the sacrificial king manifests. He is ready to destroy the wealth of his structure for a ghostly, as many advisors told him, chance at saving the borders. At this time, a drama of immeasurable scale was unfolding on the Danube. Belgrade was under siege. Sultan Mehmed II, conqueror of Constantinople, brought an armada to the fortress walls such as the world had never seen. The air around the city walls smelled of smoke, river mud, and horse manure. Huge cannons, cast from copper and bronze, spewed flames, reducing fortifications to dust. The weather in those days was exhaustingly hot, and by 4 in the afternoon the air over the Danube became so thick with smoke and dust that the sun appeared as a dull copper disk. And at this moment, the city's defenders looked to the sky. The comet hung directly overhead. Its tail, according to chroniclers, resembled a giant, bloody saber. The Ottomans saw in it a sign of their victory, Christians, a harbinger of their demise. And it was here that Rome's psychological intervention played its role. Instead of falling into apathy, soldiers, hearing stories of the papal bull, began to perceive the comet as a challenge. The prayer ordered by the Pope turned into a collective act of resistance. It's interesting to note that in the middle of our story, we must ask ourselves a question that I invite you to discuss in the comments. How would you act if you were a leader whose population was in a state of total panic before an inexplicable natural phenomenon? Would you explain to them the laws of physics, which they wouldn't understand? Or would you use their fear to save their lives, cloaking commands in the form of religious rites? Your answers will help us better understand the line between manipulation and salvation. Your reflections are extremely important for the platform's algorithms. They help this video find new viewers and raise it in search results. Returning to the events of July 1456, we see another character enter the scene, János Hunyadi, the White Knight of Hungary. His tactics were as insane as the Pope's war with the comet. While Callixtus in Rome fought the celestial sword with words and prayers, Hunyadi on the Danube prepared a fleet of small fishing boats, cobbled together from green pine that still smelled of resin. He planned to break the blockade of huge Turkish galleys. Here we see the clash of two worlds, the high theology of the Vatican and the harsh, practical logic of the frontier. But both these worlds were united by the presence in the sky of the same tailed demon. Few historians emphasize the fact that Halley's comet that year had an unusual reddish hue. Modern calculations confirm that it passed at a minimum distance from Earth, and its glow was bright enough to cast shadows at night. This is not just a visual detail. It is a factor that physiologically affected people's psyche, depriving them of proper sleep and creating a state of constant excitement. At Hunyadi's headquarters, where there was the smell of gunpowder, sour wine, and wet iron, this excitement was transformed into fury. Every morning, as the fog still lay over the waters of the Danube, Hunyadi's soldiers sharpened their swords on rough whetstones, and this sound mingled with the distant rumble of Turkish drums. The Battle of Belgrade ended in an incredible, paradoxical success. Forces that seemed immeasurably smaller managed to repel the Sultan's army. Mehmed II, having been wounded, was forced to retreat. And here comes the culmination of our investigation. On the very day the victory was announced, the comet began to fade and soon disappeared from the sky, as if having fulfilled its mission. In the minds of people in the 15th century, this was irrefutable proof. Pope Callixtus III had defeated the comet. He didn't just pray, he entered into a duel with the celestial sign and emerged victorious. However, here we encounter a second serious doubt in the official history. There is a version that the legend of the struggle with the comet itself was created much later to mask Callixtus's real political failures. After all, despite the victory at Belgrade, a full-fledged crusade never took place. European monarchs, mired in internecine strife, preferred to leave the pontiff with his gold coins and old maps alone with his dreams. The tragedy of Callixtus III was that he could negotiate with heaven, but could not negotiate with earthly rulers. His nephew, Rodrigo Borgia, the future Pope Alexander VI, carefully observed his uncle's actions at this time. It was here that the foundations of the style of governance that would later become synonymous with intrigue and power were laid. Callixtus III, perhaps without realizing it, taught his successors that reality is secondary to its interpretation. If the people believe that the Pope can stop a comet, then he can do anything. This was the moment of the birth of political PR in its most massive, cosmic manifestation. Moving to the ideological layer of our narrative, we must consider the paradox of faith and knowledge. In the 15th century, faith was knowledge, and knowledge was faith. The attempt to separate one from the other is a modern projection that prevents us from seeing the true picture. When Callixtus issued his decrees, he acted within the strict logic of that time. If the universe is unified, then the movement of the stars cannot be detached from the fates of states. To deny the connection between a comet and a war was as absurd for a person of that time as it is for us to deny the connection between pressing the gas pedal and the movement of a car. We often look for progressive and reactionary heroes in history, but Callixtus III eludes this classification. He was a reactionary in his adherence to old ideals of chivalry, but he was an innovator in how he used information. His war with Halley's comet is not a story of foolishness, it is a story of power over meanings. Here we see a third point of doubt. What if the bull against the comet was not an act of superstition at all, but an act of supreme mercy? By giving people a comprehensible enemy in the sky, the Pope saved them from the unbearable terror of uncertainty on Earth. The transformation of the perception of this story occurred centuries later. In the 18th century, Pierre-Simon Laplace and other Enlightenment figures used this episode as a caricature of the Catholic Church. They turned a subtle psychological game into an anecdote about the excommunication of a comet. This was their way of fighting for power over minds, creating a myth of a dark past so that their own age of reason would look brighter against its backdrop. We became hostages of this propaganda, forgetting that the real events were far more dramatic and profound. The influence of Callixtus III's actions is felt even today, although we rarely think about it. The tradition of ringing bells at noon, known as the Peace Bell or Hunyadi Bell, has been preserved in many Catholic countries. Each time this ringing sounds in European cities, it echoes back to that hot June of 1456. It is a living monument to a time when people believed that their voice could reach the outskirts of the solar system. Analyzing the lessons of this story, we come to an understanding of a universal human truth. Our fear of celestial swords, be they comets, epidemics, or technological crises, always demands from us not only rational analysis, but also psychological resilience. Callixtus III, for all his controversy, gave his flock what mathematicians could not give them: hope and structure in a moment of chaos. His experience shows that leadership is not always about knowing the right answer. Sometimes, it is about being able to create the right narrative that allows people to act rather than freeze in terror. Modernity often laughs at the past, not noticing how it itself creates new myths and excommunicates new comets. We are just as prone to seeking simple explanations for complex processes and endowing natural or economic phenomena with the characteristics of a conscious enemy. The psychology of the crowd has changed far less in 570 years than we would like to think. We are still waiting for the bell to ring, telling us that the threat has passed. Summarizing our investigation, we return to the image of that very old man on the steps of the cathedral. Alfonso de Borja completed his earthly journey 2 years after the appearance of the comet in 1458. He departed, leaving behind not only a fortified Belgrade and the elevated Borgia clan, but also one of the most captivating legends in human history. His war with the comet was not lost, because in the end he achieved his goal. Europe endured, and the comet flew off into the darkness of space, to return 76 years later when completely different people would be sitting in Rome. The story of Pope Callixtus III and Halley's comet is a mirror reflecting our eternal desire to order the universe in our own image. It is a tale of how human will, even when confined within the frail body of an 80-year-old man, can challenge infinity and, in the eyes of posterity, emerge victorious. If this profound analysis has made you look at familiar historical anecdotes differently, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. We will continue our journey through the labyrinths of the past, where every turn hides a new mystery. For now, listen to the midday chime of the bells. if you hear them. Now you know that this sound connects us to that distant time when the sky seemed closer, and the Pope's words had the power to change the trajectory of stars. What will be your next decision when you see your flaming sword in the sky? Will you leave it to chance, or, like old Borja, try to turn your fear into your strength? The world is full of signs, and it is up to us whether they become harbingers of our demise or instruments of our triumph. See you in new episodes where history comes alive in details that others prefer not to notice. As the sun of 1456 slowly set, painting the waters of the Tiber the color of clotted blood, the old Pope closed his eyes and listened to the secretary's quill scratching in the next room. He knew that tomorrow the bells would awaken again at noon, carrying his will across mountains and valleys. In this measured rhythm was his only defense against chaos, his way of telling the heavens that man would not surrender without a fight. And in this silent dialogue with the stars, a new Europe was born, a Europe that learned not only to fear heavenly signs, but also to use that fear to create great empires. The path from papal bull to modern space programs is shorter than it seems, and it is paved with the stones of Roman roads and the prayers of those who first dared to face the abyss. Every detail of this story, from the smell of beeswax in the Vatican to the cold copper of Belgrade's cannons, reminds us that history is made not only by great battles, but also by quiet decisions in the stillness of the night. We merely continue this path, gazing at the same sky and asking the same questions to which Alfonso de Borja once found his own, albeit paradoxical, answer. For those who wish to delve deeper into the atmosphere of that era, it is worth recalling that it was under Callixtus III that the process of re-examining the case of Joan of Arc began. This is another detail showing his desire to restore justice and order as he understood them. The old man who fought the comet simultaneously tried to clear the name of a girl who had become a symbol of hope for an entire people. His mind was multifaceted, and his actions always had several layers of meaning. If we look at his reign through the prism of microhistory, we will see a man who valued precision and order in everything, from the daily routine of his guards to the cleanliness of the Vatican archives. In his personal library, books were always arranged strictly according to their subject, and there were never any superfluous items on his desk, only a crucifix, an hourglass, and a heavy seal of pure lead. These details create a portrait of a man accustomed to controlling chaos, even if that chaos was cosmic in scale. In those years, the climate in Italy was harsh. Winters brought icy winds from the Alps, and summers suffocated with unbearable humidity. Callixtus III, accustomed to the dry heat of his native Spain, suffered from Rome's climate, which only added bitterness to his perception of reality. His longing for home often manifested in small details. He ordered olive oil from Valencia and preferred simple dishes of rice and vegetables to lavish Vatican banquets. This asceticism set him apart from his predecessors and caused discontent among the Roman curia, accustomed to luxury. But it was precisely this severity that helped him concentrate all resources on the war with the Ottomans, which he saw as the main task of his life. Every decision of the Pope was dictated not only by faith, but also by a deep sense of duty to the past and future of Christian civilization. To conclude our long conversation about the comet and the Pope, it is worth noting that history does not end with the disappearance of a celestial body. It continues in our thoughts, in our culture, and in how we interpret the events of bygone years. Callixtus III remained in memory as a man who was not afraid to assert his right to influence the universe, and this audacity, even if clothed in the form of a religious rite, deserves respect. We live in a world that was largely shaped by such strong-willed decisions, and understanding their origins means better understanding ourselves. I hope this journey through time was as captivating for you as it was for me. Don't forget to share the video and write your thoughts in the comments. Your participation is what makes our channel a living and developing project. Until new meetings under a sky that holds many more unsolved mysteries and great stories, be prepared for the next episode, where we will delve into an even more mysterious episode from the life of the Borgia family, which will turn your perceptions of this family upside down. In the meantime, let the bells remind you that even the most terrible ghosts of the past can be defeated if you have enough will and faith in your cause. And remember, history is never just a set of dates. It is always the history of people, their passions, their mistakes, and their great victories over circumstances. The world belongs to the brave, even if their weapons are just the ringing of a bell and old paper. Our investigation ends here, but the search for truth continues every day. Thank you for being with me on this journey.